values will vary by person. So, for example, some people are very thrifty, and if they earn something, they want to make sure that they're spending it appropriately. Other people have a value. It's just not important. In fact, the important value is if I've got some money, let's enjoy it.
Right.
And again, neither of those are right or wrong. But I do think it's worthwhile for us to every once in a while take a kind of a self-assessment of our values. What is, and most importantly, what is of the highest value in terms of how we see ourselves behaving and whether or not our behaviors match up with our values.
Welcome. We have Dr. Gray Otis again with us tonight. We're really excited to go into this last section. We're jumping into this chapter. I'll start off with a really good question. How do our values increase positive core beliefs?
Yeah, it's very interesting to talk about values and key core beliefs. We all have values, a wide variety of values. And the problem comes that sometimes our values get out of line with our behaviors. And then we get a little bit of a problem in terms of our key core beliefs. So a core belief for very, very many people is, I'm honest.
Right.
But if we start to twist the truth, leave things, important aspects out, we start to have a little bit of an internal conflict, and our core belief starts to suffer a little bit. And so for a lot of people, it's very important that they recognize, first off, what their values are, and that they make sure that they keep their values aligned with their behavioral patterns so that there's no conflict there, and that the values in and of themselves become core beliefs that are strengthened over time.
Yes, I could imagine that happening very subtly with most people, where you have this value and then, little by little or something, we maybe slip up or change slightly. And then before we know it, maybe there is a disparity that we didn't realize before.
Exactly. We all have fudged on our values. I have.
Right. I think every person has. No one's perfect.
Nobody's perfect. And the question then becomes, are we aware when we kind of fudge or step away to some degree from our values? And then what do we do at that point to kind of realign our behaviors with our values? And that, of course, strengthens how we see ourselves, our self-belief identity.
That's beautiful. Okay, can you go into Malia's story as she describes this?
Malia's an interesting story. Complex. Malia had a troubled childhood, and she had been involved with sexual abuse by an older sibling. When they were eventually caught after a number of years, the father blamed both of them, that they were both bad persons. And that kind of stuck in her as a core belief. And this was, of course, associated with sexuality. And so she kind of was a little bit uptight about that. Until one day she met this guy and he said, "Hey, I'm going to a casino. Do you want to join me?" And so she went for the first time and found it rather exciting. And that was the beginning of a relationship. And what she found out was that it loosened her sexual inhibitions. And she continued to find excitement in gambling. Unfortunately, that didn't work out because although she married the man, the marriage went south fairly quickly. And it was a real problem for her. And but she thought, well, at least I can continue gambling. That's exciting. I met another guy. The first one was actually physically abusive. The second was just emotionally abusive.
But that sometimes can be just as damaging.
Oh, yeah. And when she felt controlled and couldn't do anything without his approval, and then found out that he was having an affair, that marriage came to an end.
Wow.
And of course, she said, well, I can continue to go to the casino and have some excitement in my life. It just kind of got her going, so to speak. And she met a third individual, relationship developed. And again, in a fairly short period of time, she recognized that this wasn't going to work. And that relationship also came to an end. And so at this point, it's this idea that who's going to love me for who I am? And one of the things that was interesting to her is she had a kind of a conflict with the gambling, because she felt that her money was hard-earned money that she got from her job. Right. And of course, if you go gambling, the odds are in favor of the casino.
Yeah, the house tends to win.
Yeah, and she tended to lose. Oh. And it really bothered her, but there was this excitement that went with it. But she realized that things were just not working very well for her, and eventually did seek some counseling. And it's so interesting in counseling. A lot of times it's kind of like connecting the dots. And her counselor heard her story, and she picked up on this idea that the gambling for her had been kind of enmeshed in this whole concept of her being sexually abused, and then being inhibited, and then being uninhibited, and continuing to gamble because somehow those dots were connected.
Interesting.
And once she had a chance to kind of discover that for herself, the counselor said, really, what is the gambling doing for you? I mean, a lot of people enjoy gambling.
Right.
Okay.
But is this serving you? Is this
yeah. And this is not a statement about the value of whether somebody ought to gamble or not.
Right.
It is a statement about whether the person individually, in terms of their own values, were getting mixed up. And the problem for her was the gambling continued even though she didn't want to, but she got it all mixed up with her desirability.
Right.
And once she realized that, she said, no, I not only don't need gambling, I don't want gambling in my life. Quit going to the casino, and ultimately found somebody that really valued her for who she was. And she found out that she could have a really mutually satisfying relationship with this individual, and they subsequently got married.
Wow. That's quite the story.
It is.
And that's a true story.
Yeah, and it's one of these things where we get multiple complexities that the individual can't kind of read through, but it was really going against her own core beliefs about, throwing away money that I spent a lot of time and effort earning in my job, but also this whole construct of whether we're desirable and whether we deserve to be loved. And so this is really crucial. And so we see this play out in a lot of different ways. And this is not to determine whether something's right or wrong. It is to determine whether it's working for us or not.
Right.
And if we can understand something in terms of our values, whether it's working for us or not, then we can have a more clear way to make decisions as to what is going to be appropriate for us.
Now, with key core beliefs, I remember you saying, there's a lot of them that are subconscious. As far as values, do most people clearly know and can identify their values? Or is that something that, we kind of go through life with and we don't really know, we don't really notice when we're living out of alignment?
Most of the major values that we have, we discussed the idea of being honest. Yeah, most of us just subscribe to that. The people that don't, I would say we need to watch out.
Yeah.
But for example, values will vary by person. So, for example, some people are very thrifty, and if they earn something, they want to make sure that they're spending it appropriately. Other people have a value. It's just not important. In fact, the important value is if I've got some money, let's enjoy it.
Right.
And again, neither of those are right or wrong. But I do think it's worthwhile for us to every once in a while take a kind of a self-assessment of our values. What is, and most importantly, what is of the highest value in terms of how we see ourselves behaving, and whether or not our behaviors match up with our values.
Are aligning with that. Yeah.
Exactly right.
That's powerful. That's really powerful. Okay, how are values critical to our key core beliefs then?
Well, we've kind of already discussed it to some degree, but I don't think, you asked, are people aware of their values? I think to a large degree, a lot of times people are. But what I don't think they get the connecting of the dots as to how critical our behaviors and our values, as you said, align with each other and then support our key core beliefs. But if our values are out of whack with our behaviors, then our core beliefs are going to suffer. So one of my favorite words is the word integrity. Okay. And for most people, they see that as being honest.
Right.
But the word integrity means that the person is acting in accordance with their own value system. Integrity means to be whole or complete. And when we are kind of out of sync with our values, then that overall integrity starts to suffer. And we start to see ourselves in a little bit of a negative way. We may not consciously recognize it or acknowledge it, right, but it's there. And whether it's conscious or just below the conscious level, it's still taking a toll. And so that's why it's so important that we keep our values aligned with our behaviors so that our core beliefs about who we are, the most important aspects of who we are, is perfectly in keeping with our values. And of course, the most important value is how we treat others. So to the degree that people care about others, if they have a problem with that in terms of their behavior, then it starts to really take a toll on their core beliefs and how they see themselves.
Interesting. Is there any concern about someone having, I would say, like too many values? As in, there's some, I would say, people that I've witnessed that they're perfectionists and they've almost tied everything to a morality.
Yes.
And then where it's like they're really, in a lot of these situations, there's truly not a right or wrong, but they've ascribed a moral, tie to that thing. And then they are living, then if they don't live perfectly up to that, then they're feeling all out of whack and everything. Is there a point where we can ascribe too many values?
Well, probably too many values. I'd say the bigger issue, though, is how much we put too much emphasis on a given value or value system. And it's that old adage, everything in moderation. So cleanliness is a nice value to have.
Right.
But if we're spending 3 hours a day keeping every dust mite taken care of in our apartment, then that starts to become a problematic value that is no longer working in our best interest.
Yes.
Another one is health and fitness, good values to have, keeping yourself healthy. But again, if
that
we're
can
keeping...
be taken to the extreme.
Yes, exactly
Yes.
right. And so I think a really important thing as we assess our values is not to get into that perfectionism that you just brought up. That's an excellent question, because anything can be taken
to the extreme.
Yep. And when it goes too far, then it's no longer working for us. And again, like everything else, values, we want them to work for us.
Yeah.
And they do if they're positive values
Yes.
held in an appropriate way.
And I think it's important. It's like if you have those values and you have that standard, you can keep that standard there. Just don't beat yourself up. It's just so easy for us when we fall short, whatever, to really get after ourselves. It's like, hey, you have that standard. Let's shoot for that. Let's work towards that, and not really just rake ourselves over the coals when we're coming up short sometimes.
And I think, as we've talked before, that's one of the most important things that a lot of people do. And in fact, probably we all do it. But for some, it really gets out of hand. And it's this idea that if I didn't do this or I should have done that, I start to get really after myself.
Yeah.
Again, that just doesn't work. So it's a problem for many people, and we want them to be aware that if you're not obtaining perfection, that's okay. And
keep trying.
Yeah, keep trying.
Striving.
Yeah, do what you can reasonably. I even have a problem with people say, I've got to do my best. Well, I don't know when I've done my best, but I know when I've done reasonably what I could have done in the given circumstances. And that's not to excuse, a lax in behavior. It's just to simply say, no, I'm not perfect and neither is anybody else. That's okay, but we can continue to work towards a better sense of keeping our standards and keeping aligned our behaviors and our values.
I love that. I definitely struggled with similar tendencies, and I remember not doing as well on a test that I wanted to growing up, and I was really young, and grades were really important in our family and to me. And I remember my mom saying, did you do your best? I said, no, my best would have been 100. And I didn't get 100 on this test. And she asked me a really good question. She said, did you do the best you could with the time that you had and the resources that you were given? And thinking about it that way, I was like, you're right, because there was multiple things that had come up and I was balancing all sorts of things. And I realized, with everything that I was given, I did the best in the situation.
Yes.
I did the best. But in my head, my best was 100%. She made me understand that you cannot give 100% in every single aspect of your life.
Exactly.
That is when we have these balances where, you're able to have this ebb and flow and everything. And I just really appreciated that mentality that she gave me early on in life, because I realized that. And I think even, as a mom, there's sometimes, you want to show up as your best. And sometimes, from a 1 to 10, that's a 2. And you show up and you're like, you know what? Either you're sick or this, or, hard things come up and you're like, you know what? Today I'm showing up and I'm at a 2. And that is my best for today. And if that's what you can give, that's what you can give.
Exactly. And I think that's so well said, because a lot of times people get to the end of their day and they say, I should have.
Yes, I failed. I failed everything,
And it really was a standard of perfection, not counting all of the interruptions, all of the conditions and circumstances that were going on and swirling around.
Right.
So do what you reasonably can do. And just as you said, on a scale of 0 to 10, sometimes that's a 2, or maybe even a 1, and that's okay too.
That's okay. Exactly. So with this, how can we match our values to our actions? If they're out of line, how do we match those together?
Well, as I just heard somebody say again today, it all begins with self-awareness. And we do need to kind of take a look, and we all do it as individuals. We say, we do a kind of an evaluation. Well, I did such and such. How well did I do? So on. I think a big part of that self-evaluation is, how am I doing in keeping with my values? And again, what's important, what's in a kind of a balance, not too much, not too perfectionistic, but am I doing what I can reasonably do? And I love that phrase, what I can reasonably do to keep myself aligned with my behaviors in the concert of my values.
Of the values. That is great. So how do values support key core beliefs then?
Well, it's really this idea that the more aligned our values and behaviors are, the more they strengthen our core beliefs. Okay. And whatever a core belief might be, for example, I care about other individuals. If I'm doing something reasonably, to be aware of others and to be considerate of others and respectful of others, to be genuine and authentic. We talk about some of those attributes of dealing with relationships, then my values will line up. And I think it does take time. It's worthwhile to take some time every once in a while.
Really think about it.
And think about it. How am I really doing? And I think the other thing for me is to make sure that the most important values are the ones that I emphasize the most. And the most important values typically have to do with how I'm concerned and caring for others, but also how I'm caring for myself. And then in the larger context, how am I feeling about my life purpose, and where I'm going? And again, we just need to take the time every once in a while, pause, take a few minutes and say, okay, let's take a look at ourselves.
And do an
positively.
Evaluation. Do a honest, nobody else is there to see or to judge or anything, just that own personal evaluation.
Exactly.
I had a very wise grandmother, and in one of her journals, we found that she had listed out, I think it was about 10 of her own values, and had rated herself on a 1 to 10 on each one.
Yeah.
I mean, she was deliberate. She was focused. She was trying to become, someone better and to change and to, and so I think that's really important. That was a good example to me, because I think in our hectic, busy lives, we can just, get on this wheel of just keep going and going and going, instead of stopping and really thinking about what our values are, how we are aligning to them, how we're becoming and changing as a person. So.
Exactly right. And I think in today's world, we focus on how we're doing, but as has been said before, we're not human doers. we're human beings.
Yes.
And every once in a while we need to stop and see how we're being, how we are.
Yes. Yes. How are we, what are we becoming? And I mean, at the end of the day, it's like what you do compared to who you become is so different.
Yeah.
Right? That's such a different, mentality. So out of all the values out there, what would you consider the most important value?
Well, it's mostly about how we're interacting with others. Nobody lives in a vacuum. Nobody lives disconnected from everybody else. And so whether it's a work environment or relationships and families, all of those things are the ones that lend themselves to really strengthen our values and really help us understand who we are in terms of our core beliefs and our identity and how we see ourselves. And so, again, we come back to, in that kind of evaluation that you were talking about, is how am I doing primarily in my relationships? Am I spending too much time or not enough time with those things that are really the highest value and give us the greatest return on our lifetime investment?
Yes.
As somebody said, we're not going to take stuff with us.
Yeah.
But hopefully our memories and our relationships with others will be the most important thing throughout our lives.
Right.
And we don't want to recognize that when we,
When
are
it's
close
too
to the
late.
end.
Right. And when you ask people, as they're passing or on their deathbed, what do you regret? Or, what was the most happiness? It comes down to relationships.
It does.
I don't know anyone that wish they would have spent more time in the office, right?
Yeah.
Or wish they would have made just a little bit more money. It's about the relationships in their life. That's, like you said, what tends to be the most valuable.
Crucial.
To humans.
Yes.
So, wow. Okay, so wrapping this up, how do we match our behaviors to our values?
Well, we just need to look at our behaviors. And again, as we've said before, kind of be aware as we're going through our daily activities, kind of how am I behaving or acting? Is that matching up with my values today? And it's an ongoing kind of a self-assessment to determine, I'm feeling pretty good about things. Or, gee, maybe this is something I need to pay a little bit more attention to. Maybe it's a little bit out of whack. Right. And so I need to bring it back. So, for example, I'm working with individuals, and one of the common ones is I get angry too often. Well, their value is not to have anger. Okay.
Right.
Their value is to have a calm approach, a caring approach. Particularly, we see this with parents and children, for example.
Right, because it's very testing to stay calm.
Partners, yeah. And so there's always more than one way to deal with a difficult set of circumstance. But if we yield quickly to anger, sometimes maybe it's appropriate, but not very often. I mean, maybe 1 in 1,000.
Right.
But most of the time, we want to come up with other ways. And if our anger is a continuing problem, as it is for a lot of people, then we need to pay attention to that. So I work with a lot of people that recognize that, come to that awareness of, I'm just a little bit more angry than I want to be on a daily basis with my child. Okay? If this is a value that you don't like how it's playing out in your life,
right.
Yes, there's things to do about that, and we can. And so awareness first, that kind of continuous looking at ourselves and then saying, is there something here that I could be doing differently that would be more effective for me and more effective in my relationships? Then our values align with our behaviors, and our behaviors and values support our core beliefs.
Wow. I love all of that. And I had a mentor once say, when we're looking at ourselves and we're doing this introspection, just get curious. If you're mad and upset, think, it doesn't have to be this harsh or shaming or, oh man, I just screwed it up again. I just, talked to my kid in this way that I didn't want to. It's just get curious. Why was that the way? Why did that trigger me? What is it in this situation? Really be able to self-introspect and dig down to really find those. We've already gone over that even anger is a secondary, emotion.
Yeah.
And so I think just allow yourself to get curious and to really dig through that. And it can be an actual beautiful process, because then you can realign all of these things and live in such a more peaceful state of mind.
And that's exactly right. And in fact, as we look at values that are misaligned, at least in my own life, and I think in the lives of others, I personally just only have to ask myself one question. Gray, what's the fear factor for you? And how can you change it to the value that's most important for me, at least? How can I connect in a loving, caring way with others? Whether that's my partner, my child, my work associate, it always guides me in the right direction and brings me back to that which is most important in terms of my own values.
Oh, I love that example. I'm so glad you shared that. Well, thank you so much. We're excited to jump to the next chapter, and we're going to be going into chapter 10 next. So we will start that next time.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Aurora.